One of the most tragic aspects of the Black Dahlia tragedy is that much more is known about Elizabeth Short's death than her life. It's reasonable to think this deficiency enhances the enduring fascination of the topic. As James Ellroy wrote, Elizabeth was a blank page to record our fears and desires. In general, the less we know about someone, the easier it becomes to project ourselves into them and begin to identify personally. But Elizabeth was not a blank page. Before she was condemned to her gruesome fate, she was a real, vulnerable, and complex young woman trying to make it in a bleak world, not too different from you and me. Let us for a minute look past her sensational murder and ask, who was Elizabeth Short? Actually, if we chisel away at an answer, we meet a very distinct and empathic young woman. One who, in contrast to being generic, had her own set of hopes, values, and insecurities. Incredibly, one of the most valuable insights into the real Elizabeth was a little known encounter she had with the one and only Marilyn Monroe. Let's meet her. Because so much of Elizabeth's strange tragedy is mired in hearsay, it is not always easy to separate fact from fiction when talking about the Dahlia. Making it even more exasperating is the fact that the case file is closed to the public. According to California state law, open cases, which the unsolved Black Dahlias technically is, are not accessible to the general population. There are some public district attorney files from the grand jury investigation in LA in 1949, but they're much less comprehensive in scope than the original investigation. To further add to the frustration of the mystery, nearly all of the original evidence has gone missing over the years since 1947 for reasons entirely unclear. Therefore, when trying to figure Beth out, one has to be circumspect. While much of the information that has been gleaned over the years through either primary sources, news reports, or photographs is solid, fewer cases are quite as susceptible to mythologizing innuendo and lies as this one. Established facts are few. We know that Elizabeth, who went by Beth, was born on July 29, 1924, in Hyde Park, Massachusetts, near Boston. She was asthmatic since birth and traveled to Florida a number of times to escape cold East Coast winters. Elizabeth had a strikingly beautiful face. She had a mane of dark walnut hair and a proclivity for black outfits, at least towards the end of her life, although we are not exactly sure why. According to some experts, it was an outward reflection of her increasing sense of hopelessness. Although she had little disposable income, Beth always dressed immaculately and with great style. At the time of her death, Beth was 5 foot 6 inches and weighed about 115 pounds. Even less is known definitively about Elizabeth's personality. Beth's friends remarked on a childlike charm and beauty, as well as her being rather shy. She was well liked in school and known to be starstruck by the dream of becoming a great Hollywood star. Despite her apparent innocence, she also lied constantly. It has been said that she probably had a lower than average IQ. Beth's mom, Phoebe, once remarked that she had a, quote, bipolar personality. However, bipolar in 1947 would not necessarily imply modern psychiatry's mental illness. Merriam-Webster defines the adjective as having or marked by two mutually repellent forces or diametrically opposed natures or views. Beth could have had bipolar tendencies without the illness itself, which makes eerie sense in the context of what came to befall her. She may also have had some chemical imbalance, causing her moods to cycle. Beth reportedly told people she worked in a variety of jobs during her time in Hollywood, but there's no auditions or film credits to her name, or any record of employment at all, for that matter. After her demise, LAPD established that during her 5-month stay in Los Angeles, between July 12th and December 6, 1946, Beth had resided in 11 different locations. Most of it was to overstayed welcomes with friends or the inability to make rent. And one of her recurrent leitmotifs is friends and acquaintances stepping in to buy her a meal or pay a month's rent. Beth's nomadic ways, combined with friend recollections that she seemed to have a difficult time with tidiness or self-organization, might imply that Beth did indeed suffer from depression in the days before it was ever a medical diagnosis. Graveline mourners have theorized that Beth may also have been slightly autistic, given her sometimes apparent lack of social attunement and tendency to impulsive decision making. For example, it was not unusual for Beth to make impromptu trips to Long Beach or San Diego by car or bus without having any real plan or place to stay. On one of them, Elizabeth agreed spontaneously to get into Robert Manley's car, whom she had never met. Much has been said about Elizabeth's sex and romance life, with most of it woven from whole cloth. Before we launch into this, let's first explore her relationship to her own father. Cleo Short built many golf courses, but when the Great Depression hit in 1929, he went bankrupt. Then, faked his suicide, leaving his wife Phoebe and her 5 girls in the lurch. Phoebe took work as a bookkeeper to be able to support her children. 3 years later, Cleo wrote Phoebe an apology letter to let her know he was alive and living in California. In 1942, with $200 that Cleo sent her, Beth, who was 18, moved to Vallejo, California to live with her father. But the two clashed, and Elizabeth left. Cleo later told investigators he kicked her out because she was so dirty and refused to clean the house or cook his meals. The two never spoke again. When Cleo learned of Beth's tragic death, he said, "I want nothing to do with this." Sexually speaking, all that is known with certainty is that Beth was active. There's no evidence to support claims that she was promiscuous, sexually dysfunctional, or a lesbian. Her address book had the names of about 50 men, and in a trunk of hers recovered after the murder, she had a thick stash of photos with various gentlemen. A possible conclusion is that the destitute Beth used her beauty to try and score meals and hospitality from men with money to spare, but that she was just a tease. Ann Toth, one of Beth's friends during her period in Hollywood, insisted Beth was a good girl. Another possible conclusion is that she dated married men and then used the photographs to blackmail them over it. The most intuitive conclusion is probably that Beth was lonely and in search of a husband, a protector, that she could depend on for a secure and safe existence. Her traumatic relationship with her father almost surely resulted in Beth having both trust and abandonment issues, including in romantic relationships. We know Beth told friends about an Army pilot she had been engaged to, allegedly Matt Gordon, but who died tragically during a training exercise. The seriousness of their engagement, however, is debatable. In another sad case, she was infatuated with a different man in uniform, a lieutenant named Joseph Fickling, that she met out one night in 1946. In this instance, Fickling had rejected Beth, but only after they spent a rapturous week together in a Hollywood hotel during one of his leaves from service. One of the final letters he received from her read, "I do hope you find a nice young lady to kiss at midnight on New Year's Eve. It would have been wonderful if we belonged to each other now. I'll never regret coming west to see you. You didn't take me in your arms and keep me there. However, it was nice as long as it lasted." In the hotel registration book, Fickling had checked Beth in as his wife, which back then was probably a social necessity, but it still must have stung Beth to see that handwritten Mrs. Joseph Fickling. It's rather heartbreaking to imagine that someone as beautiful as Elizabeth might have struck out multiple times in love, and probably testament to a critical lack of self-esteem or self-worth. We know she was constantly fawned over by members of the opposite sex, but most of them were much older, usually physically unattractive to her and unsavory. Beth's misplaced desperation for affection may well have contributed to her sinister demise. One such unsavory character was certainly Mark Hansen, Danish immigrant and co-owner of the Florentine Gardens nightclub in Hollywood. Today, Hansen is in the top 3 Black Dahlia suspects on just about every list. He and Beth met one night at the club in 1946, although the exact nature of their relationship is debated. We know she stayed at a house he owned behind the club on Carlos Street for a few weeks, where he would put up chorus girls working at the club who needed a place to stay. Beth moved to the Carlos Street house on September 28, 1946, but in October, Hansen asked Beth to leave, citing as the reason that she kept bringing bad company over to the house. In one anecdote, a young, aspiring screenwriter named Robert Slatzer used to frequent the gardens. He had dated Ann Tove and then started seeing another Hollywood hopeful by the name of Norman G. Doherty. Doherty, of course, would go on to become Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn and Robert would occasionally be invited over to Mark Hansen's table, where Beth sometimes sat. Marilyn and Beth used to chit-chat, according to Slatzer. Beth questioned her on how to go about getting a studio contract. He recalled, Elizabeth didn't have Marilyn's drive and ambition. She dreamed of being a film star, but wasn't willing to make the effort. She seemed to have a defeated attitude, as I recall, and she hung around a bad crowd. Now, I'm afraid we do have to take this story with a grain of salt. Bob Slatzer was accused of lying about the extent of his relationship with Marilyn after her death, and really widely discredited. This story, however, which occurred before she was a star, does strike me as credible. He would have had to be very well informed about Elizabeth's story to make something so elaborate up, and Ann Tove would have called him out before she passed away. But I would actually like to know in the comments what you guys think. From this handful of clues, a crude picture begins to emerge of a sweet, slightly capricious, and somewhat lost young woman. Elizabeth, like so many countless others, arrived in Hollywood with a little more than a fairy tale dream in her heart. She had no money, few close friends, and no plan whatsoever. Whereas another person in her shoes, for example, Norma Jean, might use this as an opportunity to hustle and pull herself up by the bootstraps. Something inside of Beth kept her from doing this. She decided, maybe incorrectly, that she would be better off strolling around Hollywood and Vine, looking pretty and hoping to be discovered than, for example, seeking out extra parts to audition for or taking a temporary, if unglamorous, menial job. Beth's tendency to get by on handouts or charity from friends and acquaintances seems to suggest a lack of basic competence, overarching lack of self-reliance, or both. Marilyn's lackluster encounters with Beth seem to confirm Beth's contradicting desire for stardom and wealth on the one hand, with her either refusal or inability to take any practical steps, even small ones, to make her ambitions a reality on the other. She was stuck, unable to launch herself into any real path towards her goals. Elizabeth Short was a starry-eyed young woman who was sorely limited. Whether because of a learned helplessness or chemical disorder, she didn't possess the tools she really needed to maintain a stable life. In the end, it's not entirely surprising that of all the aspiring actresses living in Hollywood at that moment, it was Elizabeth who found herself in such trouble at the end of her brief life. Perhaps if she had a different father or access to then non-existent medication, or just some kind of faith in her abilities to make it on the boards in a crazy town, she might have met a happier ending. Regardless of who Beth was, the fate she endured was barbaric beyond words or any justification. And while she will forever be tied to this grim outcome, we can and should remind ourselves that before the Black Dahlia, there was intriguing, hopelessly romantic Beth Short with the cute Boston accent, fashionably made up and noteworthy to all privileged enough to lay eyes upon her, even if she was flawed, just like the rest of us. Thanks for joining this week's Fireside Chiller. If you liked the video and want to see more, by all means subscribe to our channel. Follow us on the Gram, Facebook, and TikTok for great gruesome content, and be sure to sign up for your free LA Crime subscription at www.graveline.rip. Next time you're in LA, be sure to come take our Hollywood horror story, the Black Dahlia funeral limo tour, and above all, remember, you only die once.